Afternoon, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you once again for the outstanding timekeeping. We are bang on time for a 1400 start. To set the scene, this morning we were concentrating on theme 1, integrated partnerships. The second theme of the conference is joint space. And as an introduction, I'd like to start with a video from UK Space Command that offers a snapshot of how space is used across the domains here in the United Kingdom.
Space to me in my line of work is incredibly important because I work for a radio station. We need satellites in order to transmit all of our radio shows, our 24/7 news, all of our broadcasting. And it's also really important for people who are in the Navy when they're out at sea. We give them various radios for them to listen to our broadcasts, and they're able to do that because of space. And lastly, if it wasn't for TV satellites and everything else like that, they wouldn't be able to watch the shows that they love and catch their families' shows that they miss and be able to bond with their families knowing that they've been able to watch the same thing as them. It's like a home away from home, and that's what space means to me.
So I'm Lieutenant Sam Hendy, XO 59.1 Squadron, as part of US 5th Fleet's 59 AI and Innovation Task Force. Space is important to us as we integrate commercial assets inside the 5th Fleet in order to address problems within theatre. Satellites allow us to communicate with all of our mobile assets in theatre, as well as outside of theatre, amongst other seas in the AO. In order for us to integrate the commercial technology, we rely on various constellations such as Starshield and Starlink to provide encrypted comms back in our robotics operations sector here in Bahrain.
As an N6 communicator at UKMC HQ, space is pretty relevant because we have 2 VSAT satellites on the top of our building. These are constantly tracking Skynet, which provides us with secret and official sensitive comms. We also have a reversionary mode called the Type 4 node stroke BGAN. This is, for instance, if we were to lose Skynet, if we were to lose the capability of achieving Skynet at HQ, we could set up this portable node with a BGAN satellite that shoots straight to it. And then this provides secret and OS comms, voice, data, whenever we need it, require it.
Radio, GPS, satellite communications, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance are crucial to my role. I'm a battle watch captain here, so I'm a focal point of contact for all UK maritime elements within our joint area of operations. This spans from the Eastern Med all the way through to India. So this covers a vast region. In addition to this, I liaise with my colleagues at the US 5th Fleet and Combined Maritime Forces to enable us to ensure our units achieve their mandated tasking and are ready for contingent tasking. I use GPS, satellite communications, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance daily within my role here. Whether this is from communicating with ships, conducting interdiction of vessels, smuggling narcotics, through to ISR assets, supporting UK forces transiting to the high threat areas which vessels are at increased risk of action from hostile actors, which I'm sure you all see in headlines. This ultimately builds situational awareness of the environment that we operate in, with it being an increased risk to UK forces. GPS, radio, satellite communications, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance are crucial to ensure that we have the edge against those that attempt to do us harm and allow us to conduct free navigation operations and support merchant shipping around the world.
Hello, I am Lance Corporal Joe White, the SATCOM Detachment Commander in Opsis Troop out here in Estonia on Opcabrit 14. The 2 primary means of SATCOMs we've been using are the CCT-120 for daily reach back to the UK, which bears Falcon systems at the moment. Also here we have their MMR using SATCOMs at the moment, the 167 Golf. Throughout Opcabrit we've used it weekly, even daily sometimes, for interoperability with Estonians, interoperability with the French. We've also used it for weekly tests in the events of a crisis with Poland and HQ Tallinn.
So what strikes me about that video and those perspectives, it's a perfect introduction for this session because we see a diversity of roles, a diversity of applications, and therefore a diversity of personnel and skill sets. And that's what we're going to be concentrating on as we approach the second of our 4 themes, which is joint space, joint working together, and specifically skills and workforce. Now, in my introduction, before the panel comes on stage, I had something prepared, but then I realised that, as is always the case, you get some of your best lines and ideas from somebody else. And about 5 minutes ago, that somebody else who came up with this analogy, I found, is attending the conference. It's my colleague David Wilkinson over there. And I remember about a year and a half ago having a chat with David and saying, he said to me, look, Anu, when we talk about like high density energy storage systems, so this is like massive energy storage capability in new generation batteries, the bottleneck issue is rare earth elements. And he said it's exactly the same for our space sector when it comes down to our skills and our skills development. We can have all of the ambition in the world, but in a technologically changing world with the rapidity that we see, we've got to be proactive, strategic and ambitious in our workforce development strategies. And that's going to be the focus of the next panel session, taking us up to 3 o'clock. So I'm delighted to have a number of colleagues joining us from the world of skills development. Panel members, if you'd like to come on stage, please, and could we give them a warm afternoon welcome? And introducing everyone chairing the panel, we have Scully, the Head of UK Defence and National Security for Palantir Technologies. We have Warrant Officer Caroline Cooper, Command Warrant Officer with UK Space Command. We have Chief Master Sergeant Alex Birkle, Command Senior Enlisted Leader in US Space Forces for Europe and Africa. We have Warrant Officer Class 1 Brian Buskell, Command Warrant Officer for Australia Space Command. We have got me, I'm going to be relocating over there in just a minute. And then finally, but by no means least, my colleague Elaine Scott, who is Cluster Director for Space North East England. So at this stage, Polly, I am now going to hand over to you to chair, to run all of the questions. I believe everything is set up later on Slido. Got it there. So I'm just going to relocate from here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anu. So as we said, the focus today is on the space workforce. As with other STEM professions, attracting people with the right skills and enough of them is a really big challenge. The Space Sector Skills Survey from 2023 found that 52% of organisations reported skills gaps in their workforce, with this being more acute in larger organisations. Recruitment is difficult, especially for software and data skills, and retention is becoming an increasing challenge. Unsurprisingly, competition with other companies and other sectors is really, really high. And as a consequence, 97% of organisations say their skills gap has had a detrimental impact on their organisation's performance. So we need to fix this. Ways of addressing these challenges include growing the overall space sector workforce, building on wider STEM initiatives, building visibility and routes into the sector, increasing access to high-quality training, and expanding opportunities for participation in the space sector by broadening the recruitment pool and including considering retraining people who are partway through their career. There are lots of specific initiatives in train, and we can dive into some of those today. But one of the biggest reasons to be cheerful is that the combined mission of defence and space is a pretty compelling one. So let's hear from those involved. And I'll come to you first, Anu, with the first question. How will we attract the next generation into the space sector?
Polly, it's a really good question. I think I've got about 3 minutes and I've got 4 things that I want to say. So I'm going to be fast. First message. We always hear it, inspire the next generation of scientists and engineers. Sorry, inspiration on its own is not enough. If you want to have sustainable pathways to impact, you'll see me using that phrase lots and lots, then what you need is a strategic differentiated approach that works in a targeted way at all levels, which is sufficiently resourced and is sufficiently strategically prioritised. So in the UK Space Agency, fundamental transformation that's happened over the last 3 years. Firstly, order of magnitude, more funding and higher strategic prioritisation. Secondly, programmes delivered by partners. They're working on the inspiration or informal education side. We call that Space to Inspire. On the formal educational pathway support going up to university level, Space to Learn, and then specifically at university and professional level interventions, including everything from internships to PhD rocketry places that are part of what we called Skills for Space. So they've got to be woven together in a way that coheres that can be driven in the right ways and where each individual layer can be expanded, number one. Number two, for attracting the workforce, this is when it's called we don't want to fall in the traps, because the two traps I see, and this is possibly a reflection of my age, we sometimes think what worked for us will work for a next generation. I personally find, as somebody who's still teaching MSc students, big rockets will inspire a minority, but actually 21st century citizenry, including at university level, some of their priorities are different. So we need to tap into different things that will provoke their interest. Also, we can't just assume that people, even if they're studying at undergraduate or graduate level, space-related disciplines, are going to come into our sector. We can't be passive about this anymore, because many of those will go into other sectors that will remunerate them more or will give them other opportunities which they're not going to get. So we've got to have proactive ways of drawing in and nurturing that talent. The third point I want to make, which is a little bit of an uplifting one compared to the slightly negative tone, is it's to do with the way that perhaps traditionally the world of defence applications might see the world of academia at university level and vice versa. And I always say there's a need to recalibrate the prisms through which communities see each other, because one stereotype is that in the world of academia, everyone looking at defence space is thinking of SDI 1980 Star Wars capabilities. And then there's another stereotype that says that in the world of defence, everyone will be looking to the traditional academic community and think it's a bunch of people who are going to be very, very sceptical about defence applications. Now, while this is true at the hard ends of the spectrum, what I found with a younger generation is just recalibrating what we mean by defence in the way that Sir Stuart was talking about earlier. This is for national protection and resilience. That really resonates, and a desire to contribute. And then the final point I want to make is when I talked about the three aspects of the civil space ecosystem, astronomy, exploration, satellite applications, quite often there are people who say, look, let's decouple them and let's just work on skills development for satellite applications. And I'd say that's a mistake, because in my experience, the trope that drew so many people into the sector and where they cut their initial skills was astronomy and exploration. And many of those individuals now have been absolutely transformational in the hard-nosed world of downstream satellite applications. So my final part is tap into the sense of awe and wonder, but use it in a focused way to meet all of our space requirements. And I think I've bust my time limit.
Perfect, actually, perfect. Thank you. Elaine, over to you.
Thanks. So I want to touch on what you said earlier, Anu, expand on what you're saying, and also something you said probably, I think it was in the first session. Space is cool. I don't think we have a problem in inspiring the new generation, actually not just the new generation, but actually our generation too. The number of people who are, in their 40s and 50s have often come to me and said, actually, I would really like to work in this sector. So I don't think we have a problem in terms of attracting the talent. But it comes with a double-edged sword, I think, because in that sector, because of the diversity of the sector, the number of segments within a sector, comes with it is different personalities, different languages. So therefore, to try to articulate what a space job is actually incredibly difficult, particularly in the civil sector. So I think to attract talent to the sector, we need to, first of all, demystify what a space job is. Because quite often, particularly in the Northeast and probably in a lot of the regional clusters that we talked about earlier, is we're all on a bit of a journey. Space is still an emerging nascent sector for a lot of regions in the UK. So we have a job to do in trying to help educate the public. So with that comes with different, I'm not going to talk about tools and so on, how we educate the public on that. In 2022, we commissioned a space survey within the region to really understand and forecast what kind of space jobs that we can attract, because ultimately our KPI is really about economic development, it's about job creation, and therefore we need to find a language to help our public and educators too, and policymakers within our region and nationally, and what that means. So when we commissioned that space research, we very deliberately briefed our consultants to say, we want to know what are the top 10, and it went on the top 20 jobs, using job titles, ideally with no space word within those job titles. We want the job titles to be something that's meaningful. Sure, great, we have an astronaut or a rocket scientist, we need those. But in terms of the volumes of jobs that we need, what is it that we... So consequently, we have a list of 20 jobs. I think of those 20 jobs, we only have one job that had the word space in it, and that was space weather analyst. Everything else was things like data analyst, RF technician, mechanical, and so forth. But then what has done is it has certainly helped, let's say, the non-space businesses and non-space policymakers to really understand, that's what you mean by a space. So then that seems much more real, much more opens up their ideas in terms of, well, okay, my business is in the mechanical engineering, we machine things, therefore, okay, that's a capability that we have that we can service the space sector. So it certainly opens up a lot of conversation. But then that said, certainly in the Northeast, and I know in other regions too, there is a skills challenge. So in the Northeast, we have a lot of automotive and offshore wind industry, etc. So it is quite challenging, but there is a lot of transferable skills too. So that's a story, a narrative that we can tell. To me, the real litmus test at the end of the day is back. I know this is probably a story that's been told a number of times. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we think back in, I think it was 1962 when President Kennedy went to NASA Center and asked the janitor at the time, so what do you do here? And is it my job here is to put the man on the moon? So that's creating that shared vision and sense of belonging, I think, is the job that all of us could do to attract talent to the sector.
Lovely, like shared endeavour, yeah. I'm going to switch focus to military now. And Alex, if I could come to you about inspiring the next generation.
Yeah, I want to talk on two main aspects that we kind of work on in the Space Force, especially in the Colorado Springs area, but it was actually born at a Los Angeles Space Force base, was the STEM to Space classroom connections that we go to the elementary schools from K to 12th grade and communicate what we do in the Space Force to create their knowledge on what a space warfighter is in the service, but also if they were to pursue that in academia into the private sector. It goes into easy things as communicating with a CAN and having a wire connected to it, into them bringing up questions at the third grade level that you would never expect from a child on technical aspects inside of space operations. It just shows the different technological gap from when I was probably that age to what they're growing up now and how they can relate those communication aspects that they see on a daily basis. It's pretty empowering and inspiring. The second one is for our Space Force JRTC programs that we're currently doing multiple exercises with them, teaching them space aspects, but also going into thing called Stellar Explorers and Cyber Patriot, where they're exposed to different techniques, ethical hacking procedures and stuff like that they've already been exposed to through their curriculum, but given a Space Force warfighter perspective on that to help motivate them and inspire them to join our service.
Great, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, there's two things I could bring that we currently do in Australia. If we do the same sort of school, we go to schools, we talk to schools about the exciting world of space, which they seem to enjoy and engage in. We sponsor school activities, and recently the command sponsored a school to come to the US to compete in a space competition where they've done extremely well, designing technologies to use in outer space. The other thing we do that'll start in the new year is a space extension program with our Air Force cadets, where they'll be the program will be built around STEM that's taught in high school to encourage younger Australians to go either into a military career in space or an industrial career in space or in academia. So two good programs, lots of investment, and I think it's value for money.
Great, thank you. Caroline? So space, we've been operating in space for 4 years, and space has always been and is exciting. However, I feel that we've underestimated it, and we underestimated the importance of it, which is why now it's becoming more to the forefront of all our commanders' decisions, and it should be. But I think we've all got a part to play here, and that part to play is that it needs to be our values that may be limiting
how we are recruiting into space, especially from a UK defence perspective. I think we are quietly professional, and we don't always celebrate and communicate our feats that we achieve. And actually some of that is because of our quiet professionalism, but some of it is also the classifications that we operate in. And that's an area where I really would like to see us exploit and push forward. And we're certainly seeing that from the NSPOC, where our junior operators can actually talk about, collaborate, they can use their critical and analytical thinking, and that is now inspiring a lot of personnel within defence, when previously we haven't been able to have some of those conversations. So we are hugely responsible in how we move this forward. What's been really successful from the Air Force is the Royal Air Force Air Cadets. They now have access to level 2 BTEC in space studies, and the uptake has been absolutely incredible, which is brilliant to see. We have 500 funded places, which have all been taken, and the Air Cadets are eagerly, I've heard, working towards the syllabus to achieve this. Now that's open to the Air Cadets. We've had a huge interest from children who can't join the Air Cadets, whether that's to do with financially or whether it's to do with the age group 14 to 16. GCSEs are very important, as well as perhaps other sporting or activities that they have to undertake or they want to undertake. So there's a bit of a challenge there. So potentially, is there a hook there, a pre-apprenticeship hook, potentially, or sponsorship that we can operate that and roll that out further to gain that enthusiasm? We've certainly looked at our STEM activities, and we've now signed MOUs with charities like the John Egan Trust, so that we can help inspire the civilian and the academia sectors from a military perspective. From within civil service, within UK Space Command, we're attracting very high responses to applications, which proves that interest is there. And from a military perspective, it's quite hard for us because we recruit internally. And I would say that we have a lot more interest in people wanting to come into the domain more than the roles that we've actually got to offer them. And our hardest problem is, how do we retain them and keep that skill within the UK UK defence space?
Great, thank you. And my son is just joining the Air Cadets, so I will make a note to get him trained to work in space. So we talked about attracting people in. Could we move now to how we're going to develop a dynamic and talented workforce for the military and the defence space sector? And what are the tools that we need to do this? And Caroline, if I could come straight back to you first, please.
Thank you. If I'm honest, it's really hard to understand what tools we're going to need for the future operator, because I don't think we fully understand what those roles are going to be in 2030. If we look at the growth within the space sector over the last 10 years, it's going to be interesting to see how much it's going to grow and move forward. But what is really important, I think, is that we understand that those roles within UK Space Command aren't always space-facing. So we have a lot of professions that come in, and that brings a huge amount of diversity into Space Command. If we look at it from a space operator's perspective, I think they need to understand the environment you're never actually going to physically experience, well, unless perhaps you're a warrant officer to the Royal Air Force who is desperate to go to space. You can't see, touch, or hear the environment. So they're heavily relying on technology and data. So exploiting future technology as innovation increases is definitely an area that we need to look at and make sure that we're aligned to and can be agile to respond to. It's a high value, as we heard, and a fast moving environment. The decisions they make significant consequences, and sometimes consequences that you can't easily remove. They need to understand the space domain, what it provides and what it can offer to, and communicate that message potentially to people who are non-space minded. And that's where the commanders need to really rely on their space operators. Now, Alex is going to give us a perspective from a US space warfighter.
Yeah, so it's easy for us to see. I came from the Army background. What do we see as a soldier in the warfighter capacity? What do we see as an airman, Navy, Marine? You can visualize that. I'm going to walk through like the day going on crew in the Space Force from an NCO's perspective. So they typically arrive, if their shift is at night, prior to midnight. with a lunch pail because everything's closed. They're fighting from home. They're in Colorado Springs. We'll go with Schriever Space Force Base as an example. They park hundreds of meters away from a gate because the parking lot is already packed. And it's winter, and they're walking all the way up to that gate. They go through their first security gate, badge in, go into the building, put their phone down, put their lunch away in the break room, and go into another highly classified area with another badging process to receive a threat brief. Gets them up to date on the current events and what they're getting ready to face when they go on to shift. They're going through this with their whole crew as they're entering into their time of duty. After the threat brief, they go inside the room where they're going to operate with, where the current crew is currently operating, to receive a back brief. They get that back brief from that crew's perspective on what occurred prior to them getting there and what to anticipate based on the threat analysis. And they go in and say, I have your watch, you're good to leave. And they take the watch. And that's a snippet of what the warfighter focus and what they go through when they enter in on crew, knowing that they're not leaving that room for 12 hours, except for breaks.
Fascinating. Thank you. Brian?
Could I have one more? I think, so our workforce is identical. The guys and girls at Bungendore, the guys and girls at RAF Adelaide would go for that same process. But as the command grows and we bring in more capability, we'll see our workforce become working in different environments. Like for me, when I grew up as an infantry soldier in the field, tactical headquarters, deploying further forward, not restricted to that CP in front of a computer screen, leave my phone outside the door. They'll be out with the tactical troops working.
Yeah.
So as our workforce grows, that's what the change we'll tend to see.
Great.
And I think getting back to the main line of the question I want to get after is the talent management aspect of that. That person taking charge of that crew is a junior NCO that's responsible for a multi-million-dollar weapon system. How do you maintain them in the service? What are you giving them? What are you investing in those individuals to make them want to stay as a junior NCO with all that responsibility? And I think it's through giving them education, giving them the means to be where they are at that position and time, as far as getting them the education, the EPME opportunities, and giving them that joint planning background, so that when they do receive a phone call or they are involved in a joint operation, they have the background and the confidence with the competence and capability to make the mission.
Okay. Elaine?
Yeah, so we come from a slightly different perspective, clearly more for industry. Back to what I was saying before, that the job requirements are actually quite different, perhaps in military. But in terms of the tools, a lot of what we do, and also the other areas, is about creating the conditions and infrastructure to build those talents. And we tend to think of it in sort of three blocks, really. One is about inspiring again, so the young people, the school age, to try and get them to think about careers in that. And there's plethora of STEM engagement activities out there. The second block is really about then the early careers and the graduates, undergraduates. So we often get inquiries from those individuals. So look, we want to work in the space sector, but they just don't understand the pathway of how to get there. Then you get the likes of many of us who are, as I say, it's still an emerging sector. We've all come from different sectors and different experiences. So sometimes we have to kind of say to them, well, actually, how about looking at companies that are not very obviously space, but look at companies, non-space businesses that potentially can go into the space sector. And so it is quite a difficult task. Then the third block is really, we talked about, is individuals in other sectors, how they transition into the role. So the space sector survey you mentioned earlier, I think from the top of my head, I think the top challenge was really around software and programming. That's a big gap. But actually the second gap is actually about commercial operations as well. So that's not strictly, technical. And it's back to what I said before, is how we tell the story and opportunities to those individuals and highlighting those opportunities, I think is important. But going back to infrastructure, universities are very good at creating the courses and developing. So we've got the Northeast Skills and Space Technology Centre that's about to be launched next year at Northumbria University. And then, of course, you have the National Space Academy and also the UK Space Academy, both also in Leicester. And, Cornwall, I think, has been doing quite a lot of work around not necessarily just university level, because we immediately latch on to universities and PhDs, don't we, when we talk about space jobs. But actually, if you think back about technician levels, etc., we need to be better at engaging with FE colleges too. I know FE colleges also now have a role in university education. So that's an area that we need to look at in how we're developing that in terms of apprenticeships and so on. Here, yeah. Ali.
I think that you've covered a lot of detail there. I just want to go on an approach, a methodological point of view, because when my perspective was, when I first got involved with defence space as such about 4 years ago, it was when MOD Space Directorate had been stood up and Space Command was still nascent. What really impressed me was right from the outset, skills was an absolute top-level strategic priority. Look at how it's translated. This is a sort of, I don't know if it's the right term, plenary or keynote panel with skills being centre stage, which generally in the sort of civil space sector doesn't happen, or if it's happened after years of pushing. So number one, there was a top-level recognition that this is a strategic enabler which needs to be prioritised, and I really, really commend that. I think the second thing is that as part of that, to go to the point that you were talking about, Elaine, as colleagues in UK Space Command were going through their iterations of how the future workforce could look, I was immediately struck by the agility side, that there was recognition that we need to facilitate the ability for people along a defence track to come out for 3 years, go elsewhere, possibly into academia, possibly into industry, and back in. Now, again, that's a great principle. The devil is in the detail, but the fact is it was enshrined right from the beginning proactively as an accelerator. I have to be honest, when I'm looking at the sort of the civil space side in government, there are many people who want to do that. There are many opportunities, but we need to be facilitating that more. So I think it shows me the recognition of strategic imperative to do this on the defence side, and we're trying to align with that on the civil space side. The final point I would raise, it was actually a conversation we were having in dinner last night, is that when it comes down to skills development and our methodologies, we call it pedagogy of teaching. I say the technological landscape is increasing at an exponential rate. So is the methodology of teaching. And we're now in a position where we get 14 to 16-year-olds. I was struck by what you were saying about how even the third or fourth graders in the US, they've got a level of technical interrogation which sort of blows us away when certainly me, I think I'm an older generation than you, in terms of where I was back at that time. But where I'm going with this is that when we're building these programs, we've got to unleash the potential and possibly take risks ourselves and change our teaching methodologies. Because I know we've got 14 or 15-year-olds, and sometimes from disadvantaged backgrounds, who are getting involved in projects and they're flight qualifying and flying stratospheric high-altitude balloon payloads, which is almost space qualified, in terms of what you have to go through. When you're looking at the coding methodologies they have, they're absolutely outstanding. And so I think if we're going to really get a sustainable pathway, as well as the strategic framework, as well as the architectures we put in place for career transfer or drawing people in or educating at FE level, we've got to look at the methodology of how we're teaching and be prepared to come out of our comfort zone to really get maximum potential. Because the young generation now, I think in many ways, they are far more adept at learning in multiple different styles than perhaps we were as a generation. So there's a challenge to us as educators.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. I'm going to move to the questions on Slido now. And the first question is a little bit spiky, but it's also the most popular, so I'm going to go with it first. It's something I remember hearing many a conversation about when I was back in defence. And I think, Caroline, just to warn you off, I think I'll probably come to you with the question, and maybe actually, Anu, I'd be interested in your view and anyone else who wants to come in. So should defence have a long-term plan to make space a service in its own right, to ensure those trained and kept within the domain are given the chance to develop SME knowledge whilst maintaining promotion aspirations?
That's a real hardball question. My personal perspective, which probably puts me in a safer space as my boss is in the audience, is that yes, I personally feel, but probably we're looking like 20, 35 hours. We would be too... Space Command was a startup, and the numbers, the pyramid, in the military, you kind of have a pyramid rank structure, which actually is that right? You know, do we have to have a pyramid? Can we go more to a flat structure? And to make that pyramid, you need a set amount of workforce. And we didn't have that workforce when it stood up. It stood up with, you know, a handful of people, and now it's grown to around 600 personnel, which is fantastic in a climate that we're in, where actually people are fighting for, not properly fighting, but fighting for workforce. And our workforce is really important. Even though our defence numbers are down, actually the numbers of posts won't increase, because actually to increase the number of posts, you've got to get the funding for it. So there would be a lot of strategy and structures that would need to be in place for it to go to a separate workforce. And I think it would be really good to look at the lessons that have been learned from the US, who have separated into Space Force and Space Command, and some of the stuff that some of our other allies are doing moving forward. So personally, I think it would be really good to go to. It would be interesting to see retention, you know, industry as well as military finding it hard with retention, and we need to get after that. But actually, it'd be really interesting to see if we did have our own UK defence base, whatever we were to call it, actually what the retention and the attraction would be like. Because at the moment, we're seeing that there's a flurry of people wanting to come into UK Space Command, but we've got to fight against the single service priorities, because that's where we recruit from a military perspective. So I think I may have politically, hopefully...
Thank you, and apologies. I blame Slido. Brian or Alex, is there anything you would want to add from...
I'm on the fence every other day. At the moment, we're moving to a service-like organisation. We're joint by design. We're moving through a process of bringing in a joint trade system. So our trade for space operators and space officers will be one trade under one pay scheme. It's different to the services. Would rely on the services to recruit and do that foundational training, and then they'd come out of those recruit schools or those recruit officer schools and come to Space Command to be trained, basic operators, advanced operators, and so forth. So our pathway is service-like. The difference between service-like and service is the recruiting paradigm. We don't recruit, we rely on the services. And that's a good pathway. It's a good stepping stone to what could come in the future.
Great. Thanks. Alex?
I'm good. We already got a Space Force, so that question's covered on US front. But definitely lessons learned, like when we're looking at possibilities of next war, future actions that are going forward, like we would not win without a coalition. So we're definitely ready to work with our allies and partners.
Thanks. I don't know. It's interesting to me that there are sort of, with all of these things, you can kind of slightly fixate on structures. And actually what we've got here are three different nations who are pretty similar in lots of ways, but with three different structures and all making progress. So that's great. I'll move on to the next question. This is focused, it's from Shurab Shah, and it's focused around mention earlier that the SQEP is weighted with industry as opposed to with the public sector. And the question is, could this limit how MOD and government organisations' ability to be an intelligent client? Similar issues exist in the nuclear sector. How do we make sure that skills are appropriately distributed? Should I come to you first, Anu?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, it's about sort of, given the industry dominance as such, how are we making sure government is best placed to be able to understand that?
Be intelligent, yeah, and make sure there's not too much.
Yeah, so I think it's a key priority, and I think a key priority both on the civil side and on the defence side is to do what I call spacing up our workforce. And there are a number of ways. So I was involved in a project 2 years ago where we got Office for Student Funding for a 6-week, very extended programme. I helped co-design it. It was quite intensive at undergraduate level. First cohort we had was 8 people from DCIT, 8 people from the agency, 8 people from Space Command, and some from Rolls-Royce. And what was really interesting was that all of the companies had prioritized those individuals, not just for the operational need, but recognizing the strategic imperative to have a collective cadre of people, including some people on the leadership cadre, who better understood this domain in which they were operating. So it was small scale, but it was growing. I know that it remains a priority for UK Space Command. It remains a priority for UK Space Agency and also for our host department, DSIT. I would say we had a lot of talk about the need to better educate cross-government what space is all about, and then translate that in a really punchy way to the highest level of government so they get what we're about. And we're not just talking to ourselves about ourselves. I think a key part of that process to make the overall government space architecture more efficient is to carry on and deepen this level of spacing up. But that's got to be differentiated, because it can go from a 3-year secondment to do a PhD all the way down to a 1-week intensive course for a policymaker that gives them the essentials so that they can also tap into the other expertise that's already there in their team. So I welcome it. I think it's really imperative if we're going to have long-term sustainability of growth for our ambitions in space.
Great, thank you. Elaine, is there anything you would add from an industry perspective?
Maybe a bit less on the industry perspective. Let's build on what Arnie said about the general government, but we work at local government level too. We see those opportunities in terms of satellite applications, data, etc. And at the end of the day, who's most engaged in the topic really depends on whether A, they're really interested in technology, but actually the people really need to understand to become those intelligent customers as government people. We need to do a lot more to help them to understand the value of space for sure. If you think about their roles and responsibilities, for example, emergency management, disaster management, which we talk about quite often within the space sector, but that's often not really talked very much about within local government and the first responders and so on. So we have a job to do to help them to kind of become, say, intelligent customers, to create that demand pull rather than technology push.
Great, thank you. Beyond the operational aptitude and STEM skills, what are the soft skills that are most valuable for military space roles? So I'll come to you again first, if that's all right, Caroline.
Gosh, that's kind of my area, which has kind of summed me slightly a bit more. So the soft skills, which I spoke about earlier, which kind of was, we put a survey out to our junior operators, whether they were enlisted or whether they were officers, and we asked them what skills they thought that actually you require for the operating environment. And it was really funny to see the contrast between the two. So very much my generation, it was very much focused on, having domain awareness, having doctrine, having ConOps. It's quite like some of the strategic stuff. Yet the answers that came from the junior officers and junior enlisted who were at the front of the operations was, as I alluded to slightly, was, being collaborative, especially in the NSPOC. It's all about collaboration, which is why I think makes them quite agile, and why we spin all visits into their department. It's kind of where I go if I need a bit of a fix myself, actually, because the morale in there is incredibly high, because it's a buzz and they can talk about it more freely. So very much a collaborative type of skill, being able to adapt to situations and demands, and that adaptability is something that we're trying to work on with our RF lead program, and that's all about empowerment, so that people can take the risk. And space is a hard area to take risk in. I'm from a medical profession, and I thought we were when people's lives are at risk, it's a profession where risk is taken really seriously. But actually, I think I didn't really understand when something goes wrong in space, you can't bring it back down. You can't, rescue it. If a tank overturns, you can immediately go and rectify that situation. In space, you can't rectify it. So the decisions they make are really critical. So the critical thinking, And actually just bringing the personal touch in, because without the people, and if we don't treat our people properly, we won't be able to retain them and keep them within in UK Space Command. And we were really lucky. We've looked at the soft skills, what that brings, the strengths brings into us, and how those relationships between our teams play out, and so that can improve our effectiveness and efficiencies. And that's really important, that we understand what we bring to it. And our climate assessment has definitely reflected the positiveness of people who are satisfied working within UK Space Command.
Great, thank you. Brian, I'd be interested in your thoughts of kind of life in the infantry and then life now in space, and how that feels different.
It's very different. Day one when I rocked up with Cam Crew, my webinar, everyone was shocked. I don't know if it's a soft skill, but I look at the workforce that I'm exposed to now as opposed to the infantry workforce, and they're curious. They want to engage in conversation. They're happy to go and talk to the guys and girls in the Bureau of Meteorology or the Australian Space Agency. They're accepting. So that we've got a young soldier that works in the JCO who by trade is a tank gunner. He was brought up in the army as a tank gunner. He has an injury. He moved into the JCO, and the highly technical Air Force operators accepted him with open arms, and he excels there. So there's that openness, there's that curiosity to excel and engage. I think is very different to the workforce I'm used to.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, I could talk about this subject for hours, but it's only 14 minutes. The first thing I give to individuals when we're having a counseling with them and I give them feedback, I give them my expectations, and I use an acronym for that. So I say care. I need you to care about the mission, care about your family, care about the people around you, the entirety of the organization and the community that you live in. With that is communication. I need you to communicate consistently with everybody around you. I need you to be accountable. I need you to be responsible. And I need you to be the example. If I'm going to empower you, that's what I need from you. And that goes into creating a psychological safe environment, having the know-how to resolve conflict. If we're working into a small area that we are in a skiff, being able to say, you're irritating me right now, knock it off. In a professional way, being tactful, not creating a hostile environment when you're stuck with the same people for that long time.
Wow, thank you. Changing tack slightly, so UK Space Academy is a great initiative. Is there a review to open up the introduction course to industry to enable defence industry talent to retrain with a space lens? So the Academy is going to, at the moment, it's looking over the 43 frameworks that we need to put the framework in place, and then we need to get the building built, which is going to be 2025 at the Defence Academy, which will allow us to align all the domains together and then look at opportunities where we can push out to industry and to our foreign allies as well. Great. Keeping on a sort of similar track, how can the military and defence sectors collaborate with educational institutions to align curricula with future space industry needs to increase the pool of applicants from the get-go? Anu, would that be?
Yeah, I think a proactive approach is needed on both sides. So there are already some existing very deep levels of collaboration with individual universities and what I'll call the defence ecosystem. But I think we're missing a lot of potential there. Of course, dual use comes to mind. So if I put my university hat on with Leicester, you know, we're the home of the UK's multi-institution National Centre for Earth Observation, funded by NERC, the Research Council. So we can see when it comes down to dual use, you know, the UK's academic space output performance is world-class and world-recognised, and that's across all of the areas, from Earth observation to planetary exploration to astronomy to astroparticle physics, for example. I think, therefore, there's a real opportunity space. I think and now I'm going to speak personally, so I think what we need is it goes back to the comments I'd made earlier, to try to bridge this, do you remember when C.P. Snow I think it was the year I was born actually, 68, when he talked about the clash of cultures, and he talked about the art-science divide. I think there's a perceived clash of culture between, say, defence and the research and innovation community, and I don't really believe it's there, to go back to that point. But I do think there needs to be a proactive approach on both sides to look at how we re-gauge the prisms through which the hardcore cases on each end of the spectrum are seeing each other. But there's so much potential there, and I think it's imperative we do it at scale to go forwards meaningfully.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add anything? I think it'd be really good if we can we talk about, I think in the civilian sector, and we talk about it in the military, but we haven't really got it right, especially in the Air Force. And that is how we track our competencies and skills that individuals have got. If we can get hold of that much better and have that tracking, it'll allow us to be more agile with our personnel. But it'd be really good to map that across to the civilian sector and to our allied sector, so that actually we've got the most agile person that can move around, whether it's across our allies if we go into a conflict, or whether we can then give them opportunities within the civilian sector. And so we can have that, like we were talking about before, sort of dip into industry and then back into the service. Or that would also help us with lateral recruiting, which has always been an aspiration. And there's little pockets of it happening across the organisation, which brings real richness into our organisation and actually into a civilian sector. And if we can align all those competencies and that framework across those three avenues, I think it would give us real strength moving forward.
I think Caroline's 100% correct. I think we're on the verge of we have a great opportunity right now in Australia. We're about to move some defence schools around out of army training establishments into a joint training establishment. We're about to move our space and cyber school into a college structure. We have deep relationships with academia, and we don't challenge the status quo of how we recognise competencies or qualifications. And we've got an opportunity now where we can challenge the status quo, where we can make major changes in how we can learn through the flow of work as opposed to going away every week to a school or a course. And I think that's what makes me excited about being Space Commander, just to be able the ability to challenge the status quo and to make meaningful change in how we educate our workforce. And we're on the cusp of doing that. We just got to take a bit of risk.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'll come to you for this one, Elaine, if that's okay. And it's from Shurab Shah again, who I think is winning most frequent questioner. So thank you very much. What are the most fragile skills presently, and how are we ensuring these skills will persist when they are needed in the future, such as space manufacturing capability? We may need skills in 10 to 20 years' time, but not today. How are you creating markets which maintain these skills?
Most fragile. I think it's probably of no surprise to everyone, certainly in the UK environment, STEM skills is probably very fragile. That said, what I've mentioned before, there's an enormous amount of work currently, around STEM engagement, etc. And we see that desire, the passion, with those young people to go into that sector. So I think there's been an uplift in terms of number of students in those STEM subjects. The real what remains to be seen is how we turn that interest into jobs, I think. But, as we all know, there is a gap, those skills gaps. So, it'll be interesting to see how that translates into those opportunities.
Thank you.
Just more broadly, beyond the world of space and beyond whether it's civil or defence space, one of the first things that the new government did was establish a new body, Skills England, to look at post-16, look at academic and vocational pathways at degree level, be it through university, be it through apprenticeships, to look at lifelong learning and the need we have with an ageing workforce and demographic changes to maintain our critical supply of critical skills to keep our economy going. So the establishment of Skills in England, and it's very early days, it's not even an arm's length body yet, but it will be. This shows that prioritisation. So I think that to circle back, all of the elements that we've talked about need to be integrated, come together and prioritise, because otherwise we are not going to fulfil our potential And on the defence side, we're not going to fulfil our remit because ultimately, from my understanding, we're looking at space as being a tri-service, genuine enabler of capability in a world that's increasingly going to need these skills that we are providing from the space sector.
Say from my perspective, when I'm looking at the skills as well, I think all our SFSCs that we have at the Space Force are highly technical skills. I think what we have to be careful of is when we have our in-service requirements where we're filling drill sergeant duties at BMT or managing personnel at ETMO or these different service level requirements, maintaining a tracker of time on how long they're away from their skill set to build on those competencies to know when they're dwindling away to bring them back. And we can't lose track of that.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one final question, which I'm going to sort of slightly phrase differently to the one in front of me. And Caroline, you touched on lateral recruitment, and I think you also said that there are fewer jobs than there are people kind of wanting to come into the space roles at the moment. So I'd be really interested to hear experience down that end of the stage on how people are attracted into space roles within the military, how you are reskilling people, bringing in new people, and any observations you have on that.
So can I just play back there that we've got not enough roles for the personnel who want to come in? Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I heard that correctly. So one of the focuses that we've definitely got now since we've got a new commander is that actually we're focusing on defence internally to us and kind of going back to basics to make sure that people are aware of what we deliver in Space Command and the opportunities that are there. And as much as we can showcase those opportunities, we still have to prioritise on how many Navy personnel we put on a ship, how many air personnel who are traditionally there to make sure that we've got control of the air, and our Army personnel that are due to do their duties. And that makes it harder for us, I think, to operate in, because somebody could express interest to come in and we have so many applications, but they also have to go through their chain of command and have to go through their career managers. And their career managers, as we call them, they kind of have the authority to move you to different roles. And the career managers will have their own priorities. So each role within defence is kind of prioritised in a system. And that prioritisation of those roles will undertake who moves first potentially. So say if you have a promotion board and you have 10 SO1s come off at a senior leader level, those roles that they would allocate into would be prioritised. And as much now as we are trying to make sure that the person who's come off the promotion board has a opportunity to stay where they are so that it improves their family work life, we still try and look at actually what their aspirations are. So how do we then meet that person's aspirations so that we retain them? So they might want to go into Space Command, but actually maybe say the Navy feel that they've got a higher priority where they have to put them into. So it's a real balancing act that we find that we have to do within Space Command. And now we're seeing for the first time that actually we've got personnel who are staying in. So we've built that SQEP, and it takes time. You know, one of the things that came out in our climate assessment that people felt that they weren't fully prepared for the environment that they came into. So we're exploiting people from the single services and putting them into potentially some of the command, a new domain, a new area of work in that they've not operated in before. So how do we quickly accelerate their knowledge so that actually they can fully deliver in the role that they've been put into? And what we're seeing now is that second turn of the handle. So people have been in Space Command for 2 years, and then they were due a move, due a posting, but actually it's worked that they've liaised internally and we've managed to keep them. I mean, obviously it's easier for Air Force because Air Force have paid for a huge percentage of the roles in UK Space Command. And because we are under an Air TLB, under the Chief of the Air Staff, it's kind of easier to have that pressure put across the Air Force than it is across the other two services. And what I feel we need to be very careful is we don't lose the incredible personnel that we've got from the other two services that have grown with us on this journey. And now they're at a time where they're due to move. Well, how do we protect them to retain them so that actually we can grow the next commander of UK Space Command, which is a tri-service position, and it's delivered on competition.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to add anything on retraining?
So we have the same problem. We have an expression of interest of lots of soldiers, sailors, navies wanting to come into space. There's just not enough jobs for them. And if we were to take them all in one go, it would be very irresponsible. They're critical trades and other services. The service chiefs would probably bang on our door saying, what are you thinking about? So provided we grow responsibly, as capability comes online, they can be gainfully employed and they keep that motivation of wanting to serve in space. Because if they come across just to fill a position, there's nothing for them to do, they'll very quickly make the decision to walk.
Yeah.
So responsible growth is critical as capability comes online.
Thank you. And I think we're ending on a positive note there with more people than roles, which sounds exciting. Am I handing back to you, Anna, or are we...
Yeah, we'll finish and then I'll just check if there's one or two updates that may have emerged.
Great.
Great.
So if you want to say thank you very much to the panellists, I very much enjoyed myself, and thank you for coming along.
Again.